Democratic Confederalism by Abdullah Öcalan. Chapter 1. Preface. For more than 30 years, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, has been struggling for the legitimate rights of the Kurdish people. Our struggle, our fight for liberation turned the Kurdish question into an international issue which affected the entire Middle East and brought a solution of the Kurdish question within reach. When the PKK was formed in the 1970s, the international ideological and political climate was characterized by the bipolar world of the Cold War and the conflict between the socialist and the capitalist camps. The PKK was inspired at that time by the rise of the decolonization movements all over the world. In this context, we try to find our own way in agreement with the particular situation in our homeland. The PKK never regarded the Kurdish question as a mere problem of ethnicity or nationhood. Rather, we believed it was the project of liberating the society and democratizing it. These aims increasingly determined our actions since the 1990s. We also recognized the causal link between the Kurdish question and the global domination of the modern capitalist system. Without questioning and challenging this link, a solution would not be possible. Otherwise, we would only become involved in new dependencies. So far, with a view to issues of ethnicity and nationhood like the Kurdish question, which have their roots deep in history and at the foundations of society, there seemed to be only one viable solution: the creation of a nation-state, which was the paradigm of the capitalist modernity at the time. We did not believe, however, that any ready-made political blueprints would be able to sustainably improve the situation of the people in the Middle East. Had it not been nationalism and nation-states which had created so many problems in the Middle East? Let us therefore take a closer look at the historical background of this paradigm and see whether we can map a solution that avoids the trap of nationalism and fits the situation of the Middle East better. Chapter 2. The Nation-State. A. Basics. With the sedentarization of people, they began to form an idea of the area they were living in, its extension and its boundaries, which were mostly determined by nature and the features of the landscape. Clans and tribes that had settled in a certain area and lived there for a long period of time developed the notions of a common identity and of the homeland. The boundaries between what the tribes saw as their homelands were not yet borders. Commerce, culture, or language were not restricted by the boundaries. Territorial borders remained flexible for a long time. Feudal structures prevailed almost everywhere, and now and then dynastic monarchies or great multi-ethnic empires rose with continuously changing borders and many different languages and religious communities, like the Roman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, or the British Empire. They survived long periods of time and many political changes because their feudal basis enabled them to distribute power flexibly over a wide range of smaller secondary power centers. 1. Nation-state and power. With the appearance of the nation-state, trade, commerce, and finance pushed for political participation and subsequently added their power to the traditional state structures. The development of the nation-state at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, more than 200 years ago, went hand in hand with the unregulated accumulation of capital on the one hand and the unhindered exploitation of the fast-growing population on the other hand. The new bourgeoisie which rose from this revolution wanted to take part in the political decisions and state structures. Capitalism, their new economic system, thus became an inherent component of the new nation-state. The nation-state needed the bourgeoisie and the power of capital in order to replace the old feudal order and its ideology, which rested on tribal structures and inherited rights, by a new national ideology, which united all tribes and clans under the roof of the nation. In this way, capitalism and the nation-state became so closely linked to each other that neither could be imagined to exist without the other. As a consequence of this, exploitation was not only sanctioned by the state, but even encouraged and facilitated. But above all, the nation-state must be thought of as the maximum form of power. None of the other types of states have such a capacity of power. One of the main reasons for this is that the upper part of the middle class has been linked to the process of monopolization in an ever more increasing manner. The nation-state itself is the most developed, complete monopoly. It is the most developed unity of monopolies, such as trade, industry, finance, and power. One should also think of ideological monopoly as an indivisible part of the power monopoly. 2. The state and its religious roots. The religious roots of the state have already been discussed in detail. Many contemporary political concepts and notions have their origin in religious or theological concepts or structures. In fact, a closer look reveals that religion and divine imagination brought about the first social identities in history. They formed the ideological glue of many tribes and other pre-state communities and defined their existence as communities. Later, after state structures had already developed, the traditional links between state, power, and society began to weaken. The sacred and divine ideas and practices which had been present at the origin of the community increasingly lost their meaning for the common identity and were, instead, transferred onto power structures like monarchs or dictators. The state and its power were derived from divine will and law, and its ruler became king by the grace of God. They represented divine power on earth. Today, most modern states call themselves secular, claiming that the old bonds between religion and state have been severed, and that religion is no longer a part of the state. This is arguably only half the truth. Even if religious institutions or representatives of the clergy no longer participate in political and social decision-making, they still do influence these decisions to an extent, just as they are influenced themselves by political or social ideas and developments. Therefore, secularism, or laicism, as it is called in Turkey, still contains religious elements. The separation of state and religion is the result of a political decision. It did not come naturally. This is why, even today, power and state seem to be something given, God-given, we might even say. Notions like secular state or secular power remain ambiguous. The nation-state has also allocated a number of attributes which serve to replace older religiously rooted attributes like nation, fatherland, national flag, national anthem, and many others. Particularly notions like the unity of state and nation serve to transcend the material political structures and are, as such, reminiscent of the pre-state unity with God. They have been put in the place of the divine. When in former times a tribe subjugated another tribe, its members had to worship the gods of the victors. We may arguably call this process a process of colonization, even assimilation. The nation-state is a centralized state with quasi-divine attributes that has completely disarmed the society and monopolizes the use of force. 3. Bureaucracy and the nation-state. Since the nation-state transcends its material basis, the citizens, it assumes an existence beyond its political institutions. It needs additional institutions of its own to protect its ideological basis as well as legal, economic, and religious structures. The resulting ever-expanding civil and military bureaucracy is expensive and serves only the preservation of the transcendent state itself, which in turn elevates the bureaucracy above the people. During the European modernity, the state had all means at its disposal to expand its bureaucracy into all strata of society. There it grew like cancer, infecting all lifelines of the society. Bureaucracy and nation-state cannot exist without each other. If the nation-state is the backbone of the capitalist modernity, it certainly is the cage of the natural society. Its bureaucracy secures the smooth functioning of the system, secures the basis of the production of goods, and secures the profits for the relevant economic actors in both the real socialist and the business-friendly nation-state. The nation-state domesticates the society in the name of capitalism and alienates the community from its natural foundations. Any analysis meant to localize and solve social problems needs to take a close look at these links. 4. Nation-state and homogeneity. The nation-state in its original form aimed at the monopolization of all social processes. diversity and plurality had to be fought, an approach that led into assimilation and genocide. It does not only exploit the ideas and the labor potential of society and colonize the heads of the people in the name of capitalism. It also assimilates all kinds of spiritual and intellectual ideas and cultures in order to preserve its own existence. It aims at creating a single national culture, a single national identity, and a single unified religious community. Thus, it also enforces a homogeneous citizenship. The notion of citizen has been created as a result of the quest for such a homogeneity. The citizenship of modernity defines nothing but the transition made from private slavery to state slavery. Capitalism cannot attain profit in the absence of such modern slave armies. The homogenic national society is the most artificial society to have ever been created and is the result of the social engineering project. These goals are generally accomplished by the use of force or by financial incentives, to have often resulted in the physical annihilation of minorities, cultures, or languages, or in forced assimilation. The history of the last 2 centuries is full of examples illustrating the violent attempts at creating a nation that corresponds to the imaginary reality of a true nation-state. 5. Nation-state and society. It is often said that the nation-state is concerned with the fate of the common people. This is not true. Rather, it is the national governor of the worldwide capitalist system, a vassal of the capitalist modernity, which is more deeply entangled in the dominant structures of the capital than we usually tend to assume. It is a colony of capital. Regardless how nationalist the nation-state may present itself, it serves to the same extent the capitalist processes of exploitation. There is no other explanation for the horrible redistribution wars of the capitalist modernity. Thus, the nation-state is not with the common people. It is an enemy of the peoples. Relations between other nation-states and international monopolies are coordinated by the diplomats of the nation-state. Without the recognition by other nation-states, none of them could survive. The reason can be found in the logic of the worldwide capitalist system. Nation-states which leave the phalanx of the capitalist system will be overtaken by the same fate that the Saddam regime in Iraq experienced, or it will be brought to its knees by means of economic embargoes. Let us now derive some characteristics of the nation-state from the example of the Republic of Turkey. B. Ideological foundations of the nation-state. In the past, the history of states was often equated with the history of their rulers, which lent them almost divine qualities. This practice changed with the rise of the nation-state. Now the entire state was idealized and elevated to a divine level. 1. Nationalism. Assuming that we would compare the nation-state to a living God, then nationalism would be the correspondent religion. In spite of some seemingly positive elements, nation-state and nationalism show metaphysical characteristics. In this context, capitalist profit and the accumulation of capital appear as categories shrouded in mystery. There is a network of contradictory relations behind these terms that is based on force and exploitation. Their hegemonic strive for power serves the maximization of profits. In this sense, nationalism appears as a quasi-religious justification. Its true mission, however, is its service to the virtually divine nation-state and its ideological vision which pervades all areas of the society. Arts, science, and social awareness. None of them are independent. A true intellectual enlightenment therefore needs a fundamental analysis of these elements of modernity. 2. Positivist science. The paradigm of a positivist or a descriptive science forms another ideological pillar of the nation-state. It fuels nationalist ideology, but also laicism, which has taken the form of a new religion. On the other hand, it is one of the ideological foundations of modernity, and its dogmata have influenced the social sciences sustainably. Positivism can be circumscribed as a philosophical approach that is strictly confined to the appearance of things, which it equates with reality itself. Since in positivism appearance is reality, nothing that has no appearance can be a part of reality. We know from quantum physics, astronomy, some fields of biology, and even the gist of thought itself, that reality occurs in worlds that are beyond observable events. The truth, in the relationship between the observed and the observer, has mystified itself to the extent that it no longer fits any physical scale or definition. Positivism denies this and thus, to an extent, resembles the idol worshipping of ancient times, where the idol constitutes the image of reality. 3. Sexism. Another ideological pillar of the nation-state is the sexism that pervades the entire society. Many civilized systems have employed sexism in order to preserve their own power. They enforced women's exploitation and used them as a valuable reservoir of cheap labor. Women are also regarded as a valuable resource, insofar as they produce offspring and provide the reproduction of men. Thus, woman is both a sexual object and a commodity. She is a tool for the preservation of male power, and can at best advance to become an accessory of the patriarchal male society. On the one hand, the sexism of the society of the nation-state strengthens the power of the men. On the other hand, the nation-state turns its society into a colony by the exploitation of women. In this respect, women can also be regarded as an exploited nation. In the course of the history of civilization, the patriarchy consolidated the traditional framework of hierarchies, which in the nation-state is fueled by sexism. Socially rooted sexism is just like nationalism, an ideological product of the nation-state and of power. Socially rooted sexism is not less dangerous than capitalism. The patriarchy, however, tries to hide these facts at any rate. This is understandable with a view to the fact that all power relations and state ideologies are fueled by sexist concepts and behavior. Without the repression of the women, the repression of the entire society is not conceivable. The sexism within the nation-state society, while on the one hand gives the male the maximum power, and on the other hand turns the society through the woman into the worst colony of all. Hence, woman is the historical society's colony nation, which has reached its worst position within the nation-state. All the power and state ideologies stem from sexist attitudes and behavior. Women's slavery is the most profound and disguised social area where all types of slavery, oppression, and colonization are realized. Capitalism and nation-state act in full awareness of this. Without women's slavery, none of the other types of slavery can exist, let alone develop. Capitalism and nation-state denote the most institutionalized dominant male. More boldly and open-spoken, capitalism and nation-state are the monopolism of the despotic and exploitative male. 4. Religiousness. Even if it acts seemingly like a secular state, the nation-state does not shy away from using nationalism and religions for its purposes. The reason is simple. Religion still plays an important part in some societies or parts of them. In particular, Islam is very agile in this respect. However, religion in the age of modernity does no longer play its traditional role. Whether it is a radical or a moderate belief, religion in the nation-state does no longer have a mission in the society. It can only do what it is permitted by the nation-state. Its still existing influence and its functionality, which can be misused for the promotion of nationalism, are interesting aspects for the nation-state. In some cases, religion even takes on the part of nationalism. The Shia of Iran is one of the most powerful ideological weapons of the Iranian state. In Turkey, the Sunni ideology plays a similar but more limited role. C. The Kurds and the nation-state. After the preceding short introduction into the nation-state and its ideological basics, we will now see why the foundation of a separate Kurdish nation-state does not make sense for the Kurds. Over the last decades, the Kurds have not only struggled against repression by the dominant powers and for the recognition of their existence, but also for the liberation of their society from the grip of feudalism. Hence, it does not make sense to replace the old chains by new ones, or even enhance their oppression. This is what the foundation of a nation-state would mean in the context of the capitalist modernity. Without opposition against the capitalist modernity, there will be no place for the liberation of people. This is why the founding of a Kurdish nation-state is not an option for me. The call for a separate nation-state results from the interests of the ruling class or the interests of the bourgeoisie, but does not reflect the interests of the people, since another state would only be the creation of additional injustice and would curtail the right to freedom even more. The solution to the Kurdish question, therefore, needs to be found in an approach that weakens the capitalist modernity or pushes it back. There are historical reasons, social peculiarities, and actual developments, as well as the fact that the settlement area of the Kurds extends over the territories of 4 different countries, which make a democratic solution indispensable. Furthermore, there is also the important fact that the entire Middle East suffers from a democracy deficit. Thanks to the geostrategic situation of the Kurdish settlement area, successful Kurdish democratic projects promise to advance the democratization of the Middle East in general. Let us call this democratic project democratic confederalism.